On today's Ask Zach, I'm going to help you make better decisions when it comes to replacement Telecaster pickups. Well, hello friends, and welcome to Ask Zach. Probably the most common question I get is which pickup should I put in my guitar? And so it ends up being a long discourse of questions that I ask the person that's asking me the question, because it's not just like I can just say, oh, get this one, because it all depends on your situation. So today, I'm going to ask those questions so that you can think about the answers, and then you can make better decisions when it comes to buying Telecaster pickups. All right, first, before we dive in, a little pause for the cause. I just want to thank all of my Patreon members. I want to thank everyone that has bought merch or given a thumbs up or a comment or super thanks. I really appreciate that. Tip jar. Quick side note, Spring, my merch company that of course works with YouTube, has an exclusive with them, has had some serious delays with getting merch out. And so if you've ordered a t-shirt or a mug and it's taking a while, I apologize. That is Spring having supply chain issues, and they should be getting that fixed soon. But I appreciate your patience in that. All right, let's dive in. So, yeah, the question is usually, should I get this pickup, or which pickup should I put in my guitar? And the problem with that is that there's no context. There's no context at all. I don't know what guitar they're playing. I don't know the way they play. I don't know what kind of amp they're using. I know nothing. And so what it comes down to is that I end up having to ask, all those questions and then find out, well, are you trying to go brighter or darker? Okay? Because it's kind of one way or the other. Are you wanting to be more assertive, kind of jangly in your face, or are you wanting to be more compressed and more smooth? Are you wanting more output to hit the amp harder, or are you wanting less output and you want it, cleaner and, kind of more open sounding? Because the higher the output, kind of the pickup tends to get a little darker and more mid-rangey too. So those are kind of the questions that you end up having to be able to answer. And so then it comes down to, sometimes people will mention what guitar they have. And so let's say you've got a 62 reissue or some type of 60s, rosewood board Telecaster. And the guy tells me, well, it's just way too bright. Okay. Well, the first thing I would probably tell the guy is, save yourself some money, and do you actually use the tone control on your guitar? Because it's really useful in darkening the instrument. Now, it may just be that it's just because, I don't know why, but everyone thinks they have to have their tone control on 10. But Roy Nichols and Vince Gill and Duke Levine and, Brent Mason and everyone and their dog that has a vintage Tele uses the tone control. They darken the bridge pickup using the tone control. They don't have it full on all the time. So, use your tone control. Then I would say, well, you know what? You could try changing out your saddles first. Because if it's a real 60s reissue Tele, well, then it's going to have steel saddles, which are bright. And if you put brass saddles on there, it's going to be more, it's going to be a little darker because it's a softer material, and it's going to be a little more compressed. So those are, inexpensive ways. It doesn't cost anything to roll down the tone control, and it costs what, 30, 50, I don't know, it's less than $100 for a set of saddles, and it's easy to install. You don't have, there's no soldering involved. So then if the guy goes beyond that, and it's like, okay, I've put, I've tried the tone control, still didn't do it. I've tried doing the, changing out the saddles. I still want it to be, I want it to be darker and more compressed. Well, at that point, again, if it's a real 60s reissue, it's got staggered pole pickups, which are pretty much as, kind of twangy and bright as you can go. Not that it's a overly thin sound, I mean, really, that's the sound of the 60s. That's Mike Bloomfield, that's Steve Cropper. I mean, and a lot of those sounds, and it's Buck Owens and Don Rich too, but it's like we don't think of those sounds as being, thin. So at that point, well, you could go whole hog, and you could go, to a flat pole pickup, you could go with a variety of different, flat pole, blackguard pickups that would probably, finally get them there. And if the guy's like really extreme, I'm going to give a specific pickup. So if you're really, really, really wanting to tame a guitar, probably one of the darkest and most compressed, and I don't say that in a negative, but it's like this is really good for taming, bright guitars, is Seymour Duncan's Antiquity bridge pickup. Their regular flat pole. It has Alnico 2 magnets, and it's like in the 6.6 to 7K kind of range, and it is really good at taming bright guitars. It's a really good pickup. Now, is it vintage correct for a 60s type guitar? No, but you're kind of wanting to get away from the 60s sound anyway. Another thing you could do that would be kind of less drastic than going to, of course, you could go with like a hybrid stagger pickup, or you could go with a higher output pickup. So if you go with something like, a Lindy Fralin Blue Special, or even the Brad Paisley La Brea bridge pickup, those are slightly higher output, and they're a little darker sounding, and yet they're still kind of, they have still kind of the 60s kind of vibe. So let's say you're in the opposite boat and you're wanting brighter. Well, of course you're going to go in the opposite direction. Let's say if you have a 50s type, Tele, and it's too much. Well, you can do more subtle things instead of like going to a staggered pole pickup or doing steel saddles. Well, you could certainly do steel saddles because they started using them in '54. So that is an option. So let's say you've got a blackguard type guitar and it's not bright enough. Well, you could put steel saddles on it, and you could put, if it has a black guard, you could put a white guard, and you could just turn it into like a 54, 55 type Tele, and you could have a little bit of a brighter sound. Another option is, let's say you want to, kind of stay more true blackguard. You could go with a broadcaster type pickup, which has higher output, and to me has a little more, It has some zing to it. It's fatter, but also has some zing. And that, of course, a real broadcaster pickup has, 43 gauge wire, and tends to be a little hotter, more in the 8K range. I haven't seen many vintage ones in the 9K range, but of course, a lot of manufacturers make 9K or hotter broadcaster pickups. So, but I think, part of this is you have to think holistically. It's like, it almost gets down to like what strings do you use, what kind of amp, what kind of speaker, all this stuff. But I think, when you're talking about pickups and when you're talking to a pickup winder, you absolutely need to be able to articulate, do you want it brighter or darker? Do you want it to be compressed or more assertive, jangly, kind of in your face? Because those are kind of two different things. Do you want it to be higher output? Do you want it to be lower output? Do you want it to be cleaner? Do you want it to hit the amp harder? So you need to know these things, and you need to be able to tell, of course, obviously be able to tell, whoever's winding a pickup for you, what kind of guitar it's in, and such, and that will help them. So now, I've already kind of talked about the tone control thing, and I've talked about saddles, and I really think that's a great way of tailoring your sound without changing the pickups. So just using the tone control is really a big deal, and if you're not using it, you should be. And if you think your tone control has to be on 10 all the time, then you're just missing out on a major feature on your guitar. Saddles are another one that just, you can make a huge difference in the sound by changing out the saddles from steel to brass or vice versa. Also, there's other exotic materials that I've, tried at different times. I tend to kind of stick with either steel or brass, and I have plenty of guitars that have steel, and I have plenty of guitars that have brass saddles, and I like both, and I like flat poles and staggered poles. Another thing, sometimes people that are wanting to change pickups, sometimes I tell them, I think it'd be more productive if you change the speaker in your amp, because sometimes they're wanting a sound out of an amp that's just like, that sounds like you need to put a vintage 30 in there, or it sounds like you need a Jensen type speaker, or an EV, or what have you. Sometimes that's really the answer, and not changing the pickup. Okay, now let's get into some recommendations of actual pickups. So for a staggered pole 60s type pickup, these are kind of my favorites. So kind of on the low end of easy to get but great sounding pickups, I would say the Fender Pure 64 vintage set is a really great bang for your buck, and it's a great pickup set. The neck pickup is really clear and open, has a nickel silver cover. The bridge pickup is full staggered and has a gray bottom. I mean, it's just it's just a great sounding pickup set that you can get anywhere in the world, and and it's got that jangly 60s type sound that's classic. That's Mike Bloomfield, it's Steve Cropper, that's Buck Owens and Merle Haggard and all sorts of things. It's the sound. It's really the sound of the 60s Telecaster sound. If you want to get a little darker than that, I'd recommend the Brad Paisley La Brea bridge pickup, because it's kind of a hybrid stagger, meaning it just has a raised D and G like this pickup here, and it's a little overwound, and it's got Alnico 4 magnets, and that's kind of a good hybrid where it's like you're still getting kind of the 60s vibe and look, because it's got like the white twine on it and gray bottom piece. But that is a good hybrid. Then as far as like a high-end 60s type pickup, the Ron Ellis 60T is fantastic, and I've got that in a guitar or two, and it's great. In fact, I have it in my 68 Bigsby Tele. It has a Ron Ellis 60T, and that's a great pickup also. As far as like the 50s Blackguard pickups, again, a really great bang for your buck, and one that's really great at taming bright guitars is the Duncan Antiquity 50s bridge pickup, the flat pole one, and it has Alnico 2 magnets. It will absolutely tame the high end. It's but yet it's kind of lower output. It's in the mid 6K, so it'll still be clear sounding, and it's a really nice pickup. Then you can jump up to things like Arcane has a variety of Blackguard pickups. Then of course you can go all the way up to like the Ron Ellis 52T, which I've got in a couple of guitars, and I really like that pickup. Also, another variation of that is if you go to the Broadcaster type pickup, which the Broadcaster type pickup, it has different wire on it and such, and they tend to be hotter as far as their what they meter, and that's because it's smaller wire, and to fill up the bobbin it takes more winds on it, and so those pickups tend to be still fat but a little zingier, and I like those. And so if you're wanting the Broadcaster thing, which is another way of varying the Blackguard sound, it's a little more aggressive, and it's a great pickup. And I've got a Broadcaster type pickup in my Broadcaster kind of replica guitar, and I like those. The Ron Ellis 50B is a good one, and then Arcane, I can't remember if they make a 50 or a 51, but it's the Broadcaster type pickup that's really nice. I don't know of a low end, like an easy to find Broadcaster type pickup, because unfortunately the Seymour Duncan one that they call a Broadcaster pickup is not using the right kind of ingredients on there, but it is a great sounding pickup. So I think that's a good kind of cross section of pickups that would help you out. You of course also have the kind of one of my favorite eras is the 55, 56, 57, where some people call it a hybrid stagger or whatever, that where just the D and G string are raised up, which also the Brad Paisley La Brea pickup has. I really like those pickups too. They have Alnico 5 magnets, and the La Brea doesn't. It has the 4s, but a really good option with that is Arcane makes a really nice, I think it's a 57 or 58, and I know that Dan Strain has had them do some custom 57, 58 type pickups. Also, again, Seymour Duncan Antiquity, they make a 55 pickup that has the raised D and G string, and that's a good kind of compromise in between a staggered pole and a flat pole. It's just kind of, it's kind of a happy medium, and I like those pickups a lot. All right, so we've talked about, the questions you should be able to answer. I've given you some specific examples. I've told you, about using your tone control and, the saddles, and also, another quick way you can fix things, besides setting stuff on the amp is an EQ pedal. There's a lot of ways to hit things. Now I'm going to talk about something briefly that I just found out over the weekend that I should have been aware of, but I wasn't. And that's that the phase of pickups can be different from each other. Now, of course, you're aware of that in guitars where the pickups are out of phase with each other. But did you know that depending on the phase of the pickup, when it hits the amp, depending on the phase, it will either make the speaker go forward when you hit the note initially, or it'll make it go backwards initially. And it's wild, but of course, different pickup manufacturers use different, north facing or south facing up, and then they will wind in different directions. And so that's where you get this kind of craziness. And when it's going from guitar to guitar, and especially when you're playing at a higher volume, you can kind of start to hear this. But what it really gets more noticeable is when you have your guitar amp really loud and you're playing through a PA too, and you get in front of it. Because what happens is you end up getting a level of phase cancellation. Not that it goes like completely out of phase or something, but you get this level of cancellation when your guitar sound is coming through the PA and it's going one way and it's going the opposite, and it just can create some a little bit of mayhem. So, and I've just kind of started delving into this. So if you have more information on this, please tell me. But this has been kind of a interesting thing to experience when you start looking at the pickups on your guitar, and how you can have one guitar that makes the speaker go forward using your setup, and then you could plug in a different guitar that's got a different manufacturer's pickups, and when you hit a note, the speaker goes backwards first. So just another thing to go down the rabbit trail on, and just a little sprinkle of fun for the show. All right, guys. Well, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.